Hello and welcome to the webcast. We are coming to you today from the studios of D.S. Simon Media in New York City. My name is Suzanne Blackburn, PR Manager at Experian. Throughout the next hour, I'll be your moderator for the public relationships of stories, context, connection, and alternative storytelling techniques. A note to our viewers, we want to hear from you. Tweet your questions and comments for the panel using the hashtag HelloPR16. That's HelloPR16. We'll be taking questions from the audience throughout our entire conversation today. Before we dive into our first big topic and introduce the panel, I want to give a big thanks to Commpro for putting on today's webcast, and to Onstream and DS Simon Media for being our valued partners. I'm joined in the studio today by three of the most influential voices in PR and social media today. Let's take a minute to introduce you to our panel. Scott Monty is the CEO of Scott Monty Strategies. Scott achieved social media fame for his pioneering efforts as the global head of digital and multimedia communications at the Ford Motor Company. He is one of the most sought-after speakers and experts on social media and digital strategy. Doug Simon is the founder and CEO of the award-winning media firm DS Simon Media. DS Simon Media helps brands and the agencies that represent them significantly increase media placements with content production and distribution. Richard Binhammer is one of the first adopters of social media for business. In 2006, while serving for Dell's corporate communications team, he became active in social media by engaging with bloggers who were using their newfound influence to impact brands and corporate reputations. Before we get into a more formal discussion, I'd like to ask each of our panelists today, what do you hope the big takeaway of today's session is? Scott, let's start with you.
Well, you know, Suzanne, I think it's important to remember that there are people behind campaigns, behind press releases, behind all the things that businesses do. And the more we can take the opportunity to humanize our communications and humanize our businesses, the more emotionally attached people will be to it, and the more they'll realize that there's a reason to engage.
Great. Doug?
Sure, and just to take a note of what Scott said, is really by improving your storytelling ability, you're able to significantly increase your media placements.
Definitely. Agree with that, too.
Richard? I think the other factor here is that we need to understand that social media is, in fact, a different kind of media and brings different kinds of challenges, and it's not simply a bolt-on to the way that we've always done things. And therefore, when you think about storytelling in the social context, that's different than how we have traditionally thought about doing things, and therefore it's not simply that we bolt on, but in fact, or transfer, but we actually have to think different.
And social media and digital communications in general, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Use those interchangeably. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to start off, we're going to have a lot to talk about today, but I want to start off with talking about this new world of social media and digital communications. The impact of technology and social technology has changed how we think about telling business stories. I think we all agree to that. It has changed the way we connect with audiences, with stakeholders, with investors, and employees. So let's set the stage by addressing this new world of PR and the dynamics of the change. What are the dynamics of that change? What is the new PR world's, our foundation still the same?
Well, that's one place where I think, you know, we do have to rethink things, because traditionally we have often thought of kind of events or media. And when we thought of media, really media was only, you know, a venue or a third-party vessel to which we used to get to the audiences that we wanted to get to, that are our stakeholders. Whereas today, using social media, we can get to the audiences directly. Media is still a great thing traditionally is still a great thing to use and be involved in storytelling, but there are options that we can now connect directly.
Yeah, I think one of the other things too is speed. You know, information travels at the speed of a tweet, really. And that old maxim that, you know, a lie is halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to get his pants on, it's even more true now, right? I think that was Mark Twain, for those of you keeping track at home. That when you think about crisis readiness and that angle of communications, there is no longer, you know, a week that Johnson & Johnson had to address the Tylenol debacle in the 1980s, to put their plan together to go into a war room. It happens now, and you have to be ready. You have to be ready culturally, you have to be ready with your strategy, and you have to have all the channels set up, you know, those multiple channels that Richard was talking about, because you are talking now directly to the public, not just to your media stakeholders.
Yeah, and embargoes, right?
You're right.
Not embargo.
Nothing's embargo.
Yeah.
And what's important is there's a higher bar on the quality of the content that you're sharing. It's got to be informative, it's got to be entertaining, it has to provide value, or it won't be watched. The gatekeepers have changed dramatically from where it used to be just a few to then more and more, to now every potential consumer, partner, prospect is a gatekeeper for your information, so you have to go over that bar.
And you know, that's an interesting point, Doug, the notion of value. You know, how we provide value to people. I mean, you think about the way traditionally marketing or PR has happened. It's always an announcement about us. We're proud to tell you that, you know, or whatever it may be. It's always about us. And when you think about storytelling, you know, are you really going to be interested in a story when it's all about the person who's telling you the story? If they make it about you and how you fit into it, and the value that a company can bring in doing this newfound storytelling in a digital world where it has to be high quality. The value could be how we help you to achieve some means, how we help to make you laugh for a little while, right?
So are consumers driving this change?
Well, I think that's part of it. I mean, they're getting bombarded with so much information, they can pick and choose where they want to go. And if you don't have something compelling that keeps them there, that returns value, because look, everybody's busy. Right, we're all running around, we're checking our phones, we're going to an appointment, we're trying to make dinner reservations, we're getting the kids out of school, whatever it is. We've got a busy day, and I'll tell you what, a brand is not the first thing I think of, right? And the brand wants you to be the first, wants to be the first thing. So if you're doing stuff that provides value and connects with them emotionally, that's going to keep them coming back. It's going to give them a reason rather than just interruptive, hey, let me tell you more about me.
Yeah,
right.
Well, which also gets to the old point about, you know, traditionally we kind of came out with our messages, right? And, you know, so the news release that we created, which was kind of, you know, pieces, bits and facts and stats, and the news release, and approved, and approved by, you know, 50, but it always had, you know, that key message embedded in it, right? And our key message may not be what the business or consumers that we're trying to connect with are necessarily receptive to hear. I mean, media might have been ready to hear that, but the individual stakeholders may not be in that spot for the message. So it's one of the things where I say we have to think different is what is the audience thinking about? And that means finding out, you know, using whatever tools you have, what is the audience actually talking about, irrespective of our brand, when it comes to our topic that we're, you know, that we would interact with them on, and then how do we connect? And there may be a gap to close in the message.
It's sort of like the old joke, if you will, enough about me, what do you think of me?
Right.
But we really do have to switch to a what do you think of me? What do you think of us? What do you need from us? What information can we offer to help you?
Or even what do you think?
Yeah.
And then how do we fit into that?
Right.
So has the change been more pronounced for consumer-facing brands? If if consumers are driving the change, is it mainly the B2C companies that are impacted, or does everyone need to be paying attention?
Well, back to Scott's original point about people and humans, a B2B brand is also a bunch of people. And, you know, whether you're a decision maker in a B2B company, you're still a person. And I used to say when we were at Dell, you know, the CIO gets on Facebook at night, check out what their kids are up to. That doesn't mean that, you know, while he's doing that, he or she doesn't often check out the Dell page at Facebook. So this is not necessarily just, I mean, I think it's largely, I think we would all agree, it's probably driven a little bit stronger by consumers, but to try and segment B2B and B2C, I think is sometimes a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah,
and
in
an
fact, humans, right? We're talking about employees, we're talking about stakeholders, investors.
Well, and that's a good point, but whether it's B2B, B2C, employees, investors, customers, suppliers, you name it, you know, there are all these audiences that we have, right? And that means that the message can't be the same, you know, one size fits none message anymore. It has to be individualized for each one of the audiences.
I love that.
Right?
So in this new world, how do you stay ahead of technology changes? How do you keep up?
Well, I think one of the things is you don't want to get caught up in what's the latest technology, do we have to be there? If I can take a step back to the B2B, B2C question, because one of the things I've observed is that B2B is a huge missed opportunity, and it's been behind the times for quite a bit. And the advantage they always had is they actually know who their prospects are. It's a much more definable group. B2C is caught up with all this growth in analytics, but B2B, you know who you're trying to reach. So the idea of actually involving them in the content you're creating is a very easy opportunity for B2B to be successful. When it comes to technology, you have to look at where are my customers, where are my key audiences, what are they doing? Clearly, you want to be engaging them where they are. If you're engaging them on a technology that they don't care about, why bother?
And it depends on your strategy, too. Are you trying to be a cutting-edge brand? When I was at Ford, we constantly wanted to be seen as an innovator, as somebody who understood technology, because the company is a technology company after all, and try to be on the cutting edge, but at the same time know that we're trying to reach a mass audience. So you need to be where the most people are. So while we were the first company to have a Google Plus page.
Really?
That sounds funny.
Congratulations.
But, yeah.
Chalk that one up, right? Nobody saw that one coming. That was.
But it's still good for SEO.
Well, it's very good for SEO, and it was at the time, because Google Plus was a big thing. It was going to be taking on Facebook. For Ford to be seen as a first mover into that space, that was really important to us. It was an important PR move, and it was important how we positioned ourselves in the minds of the people we were trying to reach. So from that perspective, we had to absolutely be on the cutting edge of technology, but invest most of our resources where most of our audience was.
And if Ford was the first on Google+, I think Dell was one of the first to use Google+ Hangouts for customer support, because we thought it would be an interesting way and an extension of how you could connect with customers to do customer and technical support. But I think again it goes to where is the audience. You don't have to be everywhere, and sometimes we forget some of the obvious things, like influential blogs or forums. Which the forums are very strong. If you can find a forum that relates to your business, we don't always think about using forums and connecting with those communities, and those are very active places, good and bad, where you might want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So at Experian, we've been on Periscope for a while and enjoying that, and also using Google Hangouts to talk about financial literacy, but Periscope isn't necessarily a platform that you think of where it's widely adopted yet. We've been on it for a while at this point. But so how do you know the line between taking the step to invest in what's going to be the next big thing versus kind of saying we'll wait until our audience is there, right?
Well, I think to Scott's point, there is a value with stepping out and showing that you're forward-thinking as an organization. It's hard for people to remember back in 1999 or 2000, clients were doing PR campaigns because they had a website.
Right.
And those would garner big news
right.
across the country. Now, of course, that seems just
right.
absurd that was even something that was going on. So, there can be a communications benefit to stepping out first, but you really have to look at holistically about what are you trying to accomplish for your organization, who are your key audiences,
and who are you,
and who are you.
Yeah.
Well, and that, as with any tactic that you're undertaking, does it fit strategically with what your business is trying to achieve? How can you tell whether you're successful with it? How are you measuring it? That's a big thing. A lot of times we'll go and we'll say, well, we're starting a new account on Peach. Okay, well, what are the analytics there? How can we actually determine
right.
whether we've been successful with what we want to do? And thinking of your plans from a holistic, strategic perspective with measurement built in, that's going to provide you with success.
That is so important. I'm so glad you said that. Very critical. We have a first Twitter question that I'm going to read to you. So, @Brennan Craigie says, hello panel. Do you think the life cycle of stories is an important issue? I'm thinking longevity of a journey versus a one-off impact.
That's a really interesting point.
I think also, one of the interesting things about this is it also could depend on the medium where you're telling the story. So a story on Medium is going to have a longer longevity and, you know, could be kind of a journey thing, whereas on Snapchat or Instagram, it's one of those kind of instant visual things that's going to disappear. So I'm not sure it's an either-or. It depends on the medium that you want to use, the media or medium that you want to use, and the social network where you're doing it.
Yeah.
I think there are going to be two factors. I think if you're trying to tell a visual story, for example, if you look at an Instagram account for a company, then you're looking at a visual story that does get told over time in short, you know, one picture shots.
Content creation perspective, I mean, if you have an opportunity to be forward-thinking, you don't want to be doing a one-and-done type of thing. You want it to be feeding a system, feeding a campaign, have planned for different elements, that you're flexible so you can change based on how different members of the audiences are engaging with you. Maybe they're contributing their own content to it. So if you can create something that you can own, I mean, just as an example in the consumer space, Energizer batteries did, you know, the Change Your Clock, Change Your Battery campaign, which came every year when the clocks were changed. They worked with fire departments till it built momentum and ran on its own. But the idea was they could come back to that again. The platform didn't necessarily matter. Use the platforms at the time. But then it's something that's ongoing, building the brand.
You can weave the stories, too, using the different platforms.
Exactly.
You know, which is, again, it doesn't have to be an either-or.
Exactly.
You know,
what I like today, too, is that there's technologies that will allow you to actually check your progress with your audience in the moment, right? So then you can adjust based on, you know, and reinvest based on,
where
you know,
it's going.
Yeah, and what's responding, what's catching on social.
And you know, it's not just limited to social either.
Right.
You know, I have a client that does cross-media monitoring and analytics, and they can take stuff and see if something originated on broadcast and was then picked up by social, or the other way around, right? So you can drill down and see not only where the story originated, but you can see who the storytellers are, who the influencers are that you might want to reach out to and help them, you know, craft the next wave of where the story is going to go as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And also just recent examples in politics. I mean, Ted Cruz's communications manager had to step down. That started with a story by a college newspaper this weekend, and within 2 days you've got the communications director of a campaign stepping down because of a student story that went online.
You didn't just do it out of conscience of having to work for Ted Cruz?
I don't know that that would have been my choice. I think I know where you stand on that issue as well. But, you know, that is something that's changing the dynamic. And Donald Trump, separate from his politics and what you think about him, you know, has mastered using social media to drive broadcasts. It's not that Donald Trump's social media is so necessarily powerful. It's he has so many journalists, media from all across willing to jump on board and push that out with a bigger megaphone with one tweet.
Well, and in that case, he really knows his audience, too. The media love controversy, and he is more than willing to give it to them. Whether or not you agree with his outrageous stands, he knows how to gin up a story and how to give it momentum.
Yeah, and I think that's a choice brands are going to be taking going forward, because you have to be sort of increasingly caustic, if you will, increasingly controversial to break through the clutter. So are you going to see brands taking more steps, not necessarily suggesting we build walls around the country, but in their own field making big steps?
A mentor of mine long time ago, when I was doing pure media relations, said to me that, you know, media stories are always about conflict, change, or counterintuition, right? And then, now you think about that, conflict, change, and counterintuition are not really stories that brands want to tell every day, right? Unless the change is, you know, that we as a brand are changing something for the better,
this is our point of view.
Right. But if that is in fact, and I know Scott and I could probably and Doug get into a debate. I mean, there are other elements to storytelling, but if those are the three kind of media stories, you know, that have traditionally led to front page stories, those aren't things that brands are necessarily comfortable with.
Yeah, though interestingly, I think counterintuitive is a great opportunity, because I'm going back, we did a project years ago for the American Society of Accountants, and the whole bit was that we're cool, fun people. We're not what you think. And they had this artsy, hippie-ish accountant guy who they were putting out there.
Women? Why'd you get into accounting? Right?
That was exactly the story. A little bit. Some of that ended up edited out, but that was the idea. Like, hey, man, it's, you know, man bites dog.
Right.
If you will.
Right.
Send that to me because as a daughter of a CPA, I love that.
Hopefully he's a member of the AICPA.
I'm sure he is. But yeah, he's one of the silliest people I know. I love that. We have another question from Twitter that we're going to take. Peter Winters. Also panel, in which ways do you teach your clients to shift to digital storytelling for themselves? So I think what he's saying is brands, but also spokespeople.
Well,
You stumped us, Peter. What can we say?
well, you know, one thing to think about, and this I don't think it answers all the questions around storytelling, but if you're working with a client, you know, we used to, as public relations professionals, always offered media training, right? And I continue to ride a horse that says, why do we not all offer social media training?
Oh, that's
you know,
great.
and social media training is more than just, you know, bridging and getting my message out, because social media training is going to be a little bit more complex. But I think communicators, in-house, you know, client side or agency side, should be offering social media training. Why is it that, you know, we don't do that?
And I think one of the most powerful tools that we can use to help particularly C-level executives, because they're the ones that seem to be the farthest removed from digital storytelling, to really help them appreciate the power of it, is to just sit them down in front of it and force them, right, to do a search of their competitor or competitive terms. Right, just to see what's being said about the industry. I was in a meeting in the Thunderbird room in Ford, where we did all of these legendary BPR meetings, and I was seated in between the CFO and the COO. I had to give a state of the industry and state of where Ford was with regard to digital and social. And all of the executives around the table who reported to the CEO were all concerned about fuel economy. So I said, well, let's go to our corporate account and let's ask our customers, what's the ideal MPG you'd like to see out of your next car before you make a purchase? Okay, we plugged it into Twitter, gave the presentation. 20 minutes later, we came back. And remember, the CFO is the biggest skeptic we had. This guy who said, I don't understand why you're wasting your time. We're losing productivity. Where's the ROI, et cetera. And we came back, and the responses were, it don't matter what it is as long as it's got a V8 engine. All the way up to 300 miles per gallon.
Wow.
But most of the people said in the 30s and 40s miles per gallon. Right, and that's where Ford was or was predicting to be in the next couple of years. So it validated the company's strategy, but they saw it firsthand from people out there. And the CFO, he pushes back from the table. He puts his glasses on his head and he says, do you know, if I had insights like this every day, I would find it invaluable. Right.
So that is a nice segue, because we're going to talk about implications and how to make sure your message is relevant in the next section. So just a reminder, audience, tweet in your questions. It's hello, PR16. So in the new world, relevance and context matter. So how do you determine what's relevant and what is important? And I'll kick off the first question by asking about PR data. What kind of PR data do you use to help you determine things like what Scott was just saying? That was about 10 years ago, is that correct?
4 years ago.
4 years ago, okay. So today there are probably, I mean, we've seen an explosion in the space in the past, especially two years, a year in particular. Have you changed the way that you're thinking about those smaller audiences and targeting them, finding them online?
Well, I think, you know, we often start with our own brand name or our own company, right? And in fact, there's something to be said, what Scott talked about there a minute ago, is start with the industry. Because if, you know, then you can move into your customers or what people are saying about you. But yeah, like let's, you know, start by understanding what the conversations are online about, say, automotive or computers or, you know, whatever your client's business is about. And then drill down into because, you know, the Dell question, while informative, or the Ford question, while informative, often, you know, feeds already preconceived notions. And to the question we had earlier about better storytelling, it's more interesting, I think, to know what the automotive discussion is and how your story then moves or fits within that, as opposed to whether we're already doing a good job of communicating our brand values.
Yeah.
Does that?
No, that's exactly right. Because to use a kind of a harsh analogy, when brands were first starting to get onto social, and they would come in and they would just go and use it as an amplification to a place where they could broadcast what they wanted to talk about. I said, look, it's like opening a door to a cocktail party, barging in, handing your business card out to everybody, and then leaving. Right? Versus right. Versus
well, you could measure it, and it came out as we got a great share of voice today.
You're not right. Yeah. Well, we got reach. Right. We got potential impressions. Right? But here's the thing. What Richard just talked about is spending time listening first. I've always counseled brands to listen for at least 2 weeks on whatever platform to get a sense not only as to what's being said, but the overall culture of the community you're trying to be part of, right? And it's the same thing. If you go to a cocktail party,
some of the players might be.
Absolutely. Because if you go to a cocktail party in real life, you either know the host, or you're introduced around the room, or you get up to a group of 3 or 4 people and you listen to what they're talking about before you actually contribute something. It's just like being a human being.
Right.
Go figure.
Back again.
Yeah.
I think Richard and Scott obviously did a great job talking about from the big picture for brands, getting an understanding of the communications marketplace. A lot of times we're brought into play on, say, smaller specific initiatives where you're trying to create custom content and get it out there. And I think a missed opportunity for a lot of folks out there in terms of how they use data is really identifying who are the influencers, who are the media people out there that are going to be receptive to their stories and what types. Rather than just using it as a post-campaign measurement to say, look what we did, we use it as a pre-campaign to say, hey, who's covering this topic? You know what? We've got this content. Let's reach out to them. Can we get them custom content, even for online, with a celebrity even talking about their site, because we already know they're interested in it, so it helps the targeting beforehand. That's a huge missed opportunity when it comes to custom content.
Well, if you actually want to take that and put it into some kind of a format, the way we used to think of it at Ford was kind of like a triangle or a pyramid, and the base of the pyramid was grassroots, was your fans. If we want to talk about Facebook fans as a proxy, that's the broadest group. It's people that have some sort of affinity toward you, right? The next layer up, which is an important one, is advocates. People who, if you ask them to do something on your behalf, they would go and do it. Would you share this piece of content? Would you fill out this survey, etc.? And you can ladder.
Might even do it without you asking.
That's true. No, that's what you want to get to eventually. Absolutely. But you can ladder people up from fans to advocates, right? The top of the pyramid, and this is what you were just talking about, Doug, is your influencers. And it could be media influencers, it could be bloggers, it could be however you define it. And there's different measurements that occur from fan to advocate to influencer that make it important that you understand who the audience is, what the outcomes are, and what the outputs are.
So also buyers, where do they fall on the...
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we have another question very much relevant to this discussion. It's from Jennifer Rosenthal. She asks, how do you best set analytical goals when you're trying to test a new platform or technology? Great question.
Yeah. Really depends on the program you're trying to put in place, number one. And number two, it's also going to depend on the analytics that are available from the platform. Pinterest, for example, it's hard to get analytics other than what they give to you.
One of the good analytics tools, forgive me for interrupting, is sales. Because a lot of this is about, is this helping you sell more or meet another metric? So I think before you get to the analytic tool part of it, it's what the heck are you trying to accomplish with what you're doing, because then you can drive the program around and also look, will the tools help you identify that?
And a CRM platform, right?
You want to do that. You want to get to that analytics answer before you've even designed the program. Right?
So does this mean that PR practitioners need to become data scientists today?
Wouldn't hurt.
I think it doesn't hurt to, have a data scientist. I don't think PR practitioners necessarily have to be data specialists themselves. But
they need to at least be familiar with some of the ins and outs. They should understand Google Analytics. They should understand code. They should understand how to gain insights from data at least at the highest level. We're not going to make data scientists out of PR practitioners. We can make PR practitioners out of data scientists. If that isn't enough to scare you into learning data science, I don't know what is.
Data literacy.
Data literacy, I think, is hugely important.
That's a great way to put it. It's a really great way to put it. But we have to be conversant in the language of data. We don't have to be practicing scientists, but we do have to understand it.
And we also have to be engaged in actually doing it, getting content out there consistently so you can start to see patterns. If you get so caught up in what are the analytics that you're not even sharing anything based on what you're about, then you've got no real data to work with. So it's like you got to just consistently, like every day, what are we communicating?
Well, and I think also, I think you touched on a really good point too, is by using the platforms, you know, a lot of people just, oh yeah, we're going to have a Facebook page, and then, you know, they never touch it again because, you know, marketing or whoever managed the Facebook page, and they've got their analytics figured out. I mean, sometimes by sitting down and actually doing it yourself for a week, or, you know, every once in a while, over a week, all of a sudden, you know, little lights start to go off about, well, why aren't we measuring that as opposed to this? And why aren't we looking, you know, look at this influencer here who I've heard about, but they're coming in and out of our page and doing this stuff, but we aren't getting what do we need to do? You know, you don't know to ask those questions unless you're playing with it a little bit sometimes.
So let's talk about the stakeholder engagement when it comes to PR and around this whole discussion around data and analytics. Are you finding that stakeholders internally, especially from the C-level, want to know what's moving the needle? Or do they want kind of a basic top line of this is what's valuable?
I think both, obviously. You know, what's working, what's valuable, what's moving the needle, and what's making change. And to a point when you're talking about the CEO, a key part of that is what is the role of the CEO. And you have to be true to what their comfort level is. On video, we have 4 different categories of CEO capability, and this also works to social media. Are they good enough that they could host their own show or event? Are they good enough to be a guest? Are they good enough to do interview sound bites? Are they good enough to deliver a speech? Those are different comfort levels, different skill sets. So as you're starting to feed what you're offering in social media, you have to factor in what's the content that they're going to come across well and is going to serve the business needs well and make them happy, because they're human beings as well. You know, if they're just so stressed out.
And they're not going to be interested, I don't think, in the granularity of, well, how many likes do we have on Facebook, for example. They want to know what business results is it driving, right? To your point, Doug, is it driving sales? Is it driving awareness? Is it driving reputation, customer satisfaction? Absolutely. Those are all different ways they think from a business perspective. So it's really our responsibility as communicators to speak the language of the executives we support and to give them results and to give them analytics that support their needs.
And that's often true. You know, we go back to what analytics should you collect. I mean, to the extent that the analytics can align with the KPIs inside of the business already, that can be a very, very powerful thing. And the other thing is, to the question also that we had earlier about executives and involving them, pretty simple dashboards can often help move the needle. You know, did you know that our brand had this many mentions this week in social media? Did you know? And you know, it could be straightforward, even though there's sometimes a little screwy sentiment analysis. That, you know, all of a sudden when you start to show that to a brand or a manager, you start to get some interest and concern. When you start with some of the macro, and they may not be the kind of ongoing statistics that you actually align your programs around. They might be. But those kinds of dashboards can start to get executives or senior management team really interested in, like back to your example when you showed it to them.
That's exactly it. And the more visual you can get in that, the better. Because in my experience, most C-level executives are, you know, a little schizophrenic in terms of their attention span. And if you just show them a pretty picture, or if it's a live feed, you know, I was just down at the Social Media Week headquarters this morning with Signal Lab, my client, and they had 6 huge dashboards up there that were monitoring in real time what was going on, and I was mesmerized as I sat there and looked at them. If you put even one of these outside the office of a CEO and they walk out and they can spot whatever is relevant to them, and you're following the trends, they're going to love you.
That's why we had a Dell, the command center, you know, that was right near the executive suite. They walked by and they could see the pie charts and what was going on. And then but then they'd stop and ask the questions, and you know, the next thing you knew, you'd see them walking by with someone else and saying, oh yeah, well that's telling us that, you know, we've got share of voice today and our competitors don't. And
and I think Scott's clearly a yes to your data scientist question from earlier.
So I asked that question because I found that when we have, well, in the past, when we talk to executives around impressions, it's like, well, so what does that mean, really? You're like, well, I don't really know, right? Kind of nothing. Awareness, reach, right? So what does that mean? How do you know if we're actually reaching these people, or if the message is resonating? And, you know, having those, the PR analytics and PR data gives you the ammunition you need to have those follow-up conversations. And again, they're numbers-driven people.
And that's why I mentioned outputs and outcomes. It's something that Katie Payne, the queen of measurement, has touched on before, is that, okay, awareness is one thing, but what's the output? And now that they're aware of you, what are they doing as a result? How can you measure actions taken or things spoken or things shared, whatever it happens to be? You know, how do you measure those outputs?
Great.
And also understand cause and effect.
Yes.
So in this new world, is controlling the message something that brands need to give up?
Well, I think it's been something they've had to give up for quite a while, but not completely, right? We need to realize that complete control of the message is no longer, it hasn't been part of the conversation for years, okay? However, you know, there's this old trope, excuse me. Trope's not good if you want to, if you're hungry. No, forget it. There's this old trope that if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to tell it for you, right? So you at least have to have your bare bones messaging out there, and you need to be, again, working with your constituent audiences to understand how they're picking up on it, how they need to hear it. I mean, this is the same thing that happened all the way back in 2008 with the Obama campaign. They broke it up into veterans for Obama, teachers for Obama, plumbers for, you know, however it was. And the messaging was delivered specific to each of those groups so they could take it and make it their own, right? And that was a realization that the message was not only owned by the headquarters, right? And I think brands are getting much better at that and understanding how they have to deliver messages to each of their constituent audiences.
So speaking back to your pyramid, are you able to map those kind of targets, veterans, for example, to advocates? How does that happen?
They absolutely are. When I was at Ford, we had a site called Ford Social, and we built up basically vertical content streams for people that were interested in you know, muscle cars, people that were interested in electric vehicles. And sometimes the paths cross, although you're more likely to get an electric car owner salivating over a Mustang and a Mustang owner admitting that they'd go electric, right? But it's different content for each of those groups, and then they would go out to where they live on the web and advocate on their own. But if you didn't deliver that custom content to them to begin with, then it's not going to go anywhere.
And that's why the growth of video in an online world is so important, because it's self-selecting from the perspective of being a niche audience. I mean, from our survey, we found 76% of digital journalists, online media, will use outside-produced video in its form as produced. So this is an opportunity to create custom content for these different verticals where you will have some semblance of message control, because you know in advance you're actually producing it for an audience that wants it, and you've got all these outlets that are willing to distribute it for you.
Release?
Well, I wouldn't even call it, you know, press release, and press releases get a bad name. There's terrible press releases, and there's great press releases. But the one key thing that's changed is rarely is it a one-size-fits-all story across platforms. And you have to be flexible to provide that different news content. I mean, it was much easier when we could put out one story back in the video news release type days and everyone wanted to pick it up. But now this niche wants this angle. This niche wants another angle. This niche wants another angle.
And no longer is there the differentiation between print broadcasting, you know, because the
all
print people want the video too.
Of course.
You know, which is a complete kind of flip around.
Right. So, Richard, what do you think about controlling the message? How can brands navigate that?
I think brands still want to have a message. You know, we still have our messages. The question is, are they resonating, and what's the gap? And again, when we talked about, you know, how do you move in this space, and what are your outcomes? I mean, you know, did our message resonate better this year than last year? Is it, you know, are we delivering, and this gets into the storytelling as well, are we delivering the kinds of stories that are resonating with people and then picking them up and moving them online? So yes, we have a message, but there's often a gap, and then the question becomes, how do we close that gap over time with stories?
Right. So it's important to pay attention to what the competition is doing, both in terms of messaging, but also in the outreach strategy. In their influencer strategy. Okay.
Yes. I think social probably gives you a better perspective on it than ever before. I saw someone yesterday that showed me a demo of a software that, they absolutely were checking, who was posting more often to Facebook, who was getting more engagement on Facebook.
Compared to the competition?
Yes, compared to the competition, all the way down the line. Twitter, what was one company producing, what was the other company producing, who was getting engagement, who was getting retweets, who was picking up followers, who was getting, So I thought it was very interesting to have that kind of competitive layover.
I know in my time at Ford, the traditional communications team certainly concentrated on comparative metrics, share of voice, where we are with respect to the global competition on any given week. But when it came time to looking at inspirations for innovation in digital storytelling and digital communications, we actually didn't look at our competition. We looked at the best in the world. We looked at CPG brands. We looked at Coca-Cola and other non-automotive brands to keep us on our toes, to keep us the best of our industry, and that's where we got our inspiration from. When it came time to proving that we were doing better than the competition in terms of awareness and turning to sales and the whole funnel and everything like that, of course we had to look at our competitive set there. But when it came time to innovation, it was really out of the box.
Great. So who's doing this well today in terms of the niche audiences and being able to reach them? Are there brands that you admire? Or
yes.
Okay.
I think General Electric is brilliant. Their content, their magazines. Here's this industrial company that's doing all kinds of visual stuff that is technologically focused, and I've always thought that General Electric is at the forefront. I think Coca-Cola has done a brilliant job, especially with their page, the Coke Journey page, I think it's called. I think those are two. To look at.
And Coke's angle too, with going historic and going with collectors and making a thing out of their corporate archivist. They've made their corporate archivist a star.
Hero.
Right, because Coca-Cola memorabilia is a thing. It's something that people, and Coke has realized that's an emotional connection to a particular audience. Right? They did a great job.
And I think one of the key things is looking at your core audience. And I always look to politics for early trends because they're able to measure so quickly what works and what doesn't. And what's changed, especially at the presidential level, is it's no longer about trying to get the people in the middle, the undecideds, if you will. It's how do you get your core group fired up? And we're seeing that come. I mean, an example from Ford, which does it well. I was in a jewelry store, and they actually now sell jewelry, which is the layered paint that fell on the floor when they were painting Mustangs, and then layered up in different paint colors, and they make beautiful jewelry pieces. But if you're someone who is into Ford, oh, this is from the Mustang, and they're beautiful pieces of jewelry. So it's like marketing to that fan base. If you're a Chevy guy, you're probably not looking for the Mustang jewelry.
But that's an example of a physical object then that has a story built into it. Because you go to a party and someone goes, oh, I like those earrings, I like those cufflinks. Well, there's a story behind it, and suddenly you've got an advocate built in to, and they're not even necessarily a car customer yet. They might be, but they might be in the market. It's their chance to advocate on behalf of the brand.
We have a question from Twitter that's actually going to fit perfectly into what we were just talking about. So Scott Clark asks, message and relevance have to go together? Question mark. Otherwise, is it a waste of time and electricity?
No, I think that's absolutely right. Staying in the automotive segment for a while, if I may, General Motors really blew it out of the water at the Consumer Electronics Show. You talk about message and relevance. Just in January. They came out of nowhere. Ford has been at CES for like 8 years. Now GM shows up and they reveal their electric car, the Bolt. And messaging around $500 million that they spent investing in Lyft, and all these other things that are related to a consumer electronics audience, completely irrelevant to them, with a message that GM is now part of the mobile and electronics community, right? And they've done everything right to help people think of them a little bit differently.
And Ford was actually the pioneer in going outside the vertical to consumer electronics. In full disclosure, we've worked with the CTA, provide the global B-roll for that show. But you were among the first when the auto industry was so challenged, say, well, we're not going to try and tell an auto story, because anyone they tell, they're going to start with, will the auto industry survive? You know, we're going to sell a technology story and just move it. And to get back to Scott's question, I think one of the things about relevance is you don't have to be locked into your own vertical. And oftentimes there are great opportunities to tell your story outside your vertical, and then you own that space instead of just competing with everyone else.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Great.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the last section of today. Just a reminder to our audience, we are taking questions live via Twitter. That's HelloPR16. Use that hashtag and send us your questions. So we've talked a lot today about messaging and relevance. Let's talk about how we need to make our stories more human. Beyond text, how can we use videos and visuals as alternative storytelling formats and platform?
Sure. Well, I mean, video is the dominant medium. That's what people want. That's what they want to experience. 52% of marketing pros say it gives the most ROI. You've got 64% of consumers more likely to buy a product if they've seen a video about it. So even when we talk social and other platforms, it's really about video that you're putting together for them. For the stories you're considering, there are three ways that you need to think about putting it together. Is it going to inform them? Is it going to entertain them? Is it going to provide value to them? You have to check off one of those boxes, or no one's going to want to watch it, because again, your audience can self-select and they can bail out from you. So that's your focus. What are you going to do? You're going to entertain, inform, and provide value. You do all three, of course, that's a home run.
Right.
And with regard to the humanization aspect, I think, you know, using your built-in assets for storytelling, your employees. Let's start with that, right? We've got
Customers as heroes.
customers as
One.
well. You know, people that are already passionate about the brand. This is an excellent opportunity to tap into that, right? And you know, we used to tell this to dealers: feature real customers, real humans, and then you go to a dealer Facebook page and you see picture after picture after picture of customer, new car, customer, new car. You know, where's the story in that? Where is it informing, engaging, or entertaining at that point, right? Yeah. So, keeping in mind that the story has to be like a story you would tell. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? It's got a hero, which is usually the brand, and that's a mistake, I would argue. Right? Brands making themselves the hero. That's more of, you know, but enough about me. Let's hear what you think about me. You know, making the customer the hero, or making someone else the hero that you're trying to reach. And the brand
so making
is
the value the hero.
Well,
whatever the brand delivers.
The brand is a minor player, right? And the brand comes in, and minor players in stories, whether it's you know, Goldilocks or Little Red Riding, or whatever you want to take from nursery rhyme times. There's always a beginning, middle, and end, a challenge or an anti-hero, right? And there's some kind of
conflict, change,
there's absolutely. This is where conflict and change come in again. This is storytelling 101, right? But remembering to insert the human aspect into it and make some sort of emotional connection that pulls people in. This is where you really have to, and doing a you know, a product video that just looks at the features of a product, that's not necessarily going to do it.
Interestingly, because what's much more powerful is a how-to video for products. Those are still among the most powerful. You say, look how great it is. It's got this capability and that capability, versus, hey, you got this? Oh, here's how you open the box. You take it out. You know, this is how you're gonna get the most value out of it.
So I have to say that is expensive, right? So how do you, making the video can be, that's what's great about the new technologies coming out today. But how do you know what kind of content is prime for this alternative storytelling techniques, like video?
Right, but let's also not forget, just to be, you know, and I'm a big proponent of video as well, but let's not let's not forget that there are 2 billion pictures uploaded to the web every day, and that in terms of still photography, you know, you name it, Instagram and, you know, 15 other sites, all of which have a terrible job of search, because image search is very difficult and still evolving, and essentially no metrics. And then on top of that, visual storytelling without text. You know, how do I put 7 different Instagram pictures up over a period of time and tell that visual story for my brand of whatever it is. I think those kinds of things are also challenging, you know, and so that when we talk about alternative storytelling, I think it's important that we understand the web becomes more visual. Visual is also stills, it's also cartoons, it's also infographics, good ones and rotten ones. Slideshows, cartoons, illustrations, you know, so there's a whole other element here of storytelling that, you know, it can be adjunct to or complementary to videos, but, you know, is moving away from text. And we don't always think those through, and how do you tell, you know, most brands don't want to be a cartoon, but sometimes cartoons are highly effective, you know, and the same with, you know, still pictures without text. I mean, how do you do that?
Well, go ahead, Sal.
Just a couple of points. Thinking about text and video, you know, we're seeing a rise of video that includes captioning. It doesn't wait for the captioning to automatically take place. That brands and video creators are actually putting in there.
Yes.
Because if you're on a noisy train, right, or if you're just scrolling by and you suddenly can see the video and read the video, not listen to it, that becomes extraordinarily helpful. Yeah. The other thing, too, is that
it's seeing in Facebook a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some news stories a lot.
BuzzFeed, a lot of news organizations are doing it. The other thing is, if you're finding video to be too expensive straight out of the gate, an option is storyboard it as you would a video, right? And then put a slideshow together of 6, 7, 8 slides that tell that story, right? And see what kind of results you get from that. And once you get some pickup and get some income coming in, you come and see Doug and his group, and you go, all right, here's the storyboard. When you guys go, turn it into an actual video, right?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, a key part, and I'll get to producing that kind of video in a moment, but getting to Richard's point about the still, if you have a video on Instagram, the person's first experience of that will be as a still.
Yes.
So you have to be very specific about what that image is. Additionally, they're going to maybe look at it for between 1 and 4 seconds. That's what the data says before making a decision. So you've got to factor that in. Now, Instagram starts with the sound off. So to Scott's point, if you're making a video that right out of the gate you've got narrative copy with no visual reinforcement, most people when they say, oh wait, maybe that's interesting, I will hit it, they might get you in the middle of a sentence. So you might want to wait a little bit before you're doing the narrative portion. If it's for Instagram, I think, Richard, you were talking about before, different types of content for different aspects of your social media ecosystem. Now, from the price perspective, I think a key part is looking at events where you have budget, you've invested, and you're looking to get more bang at them. Trade shows are one of the biggest opportunities, and again, a missed opportunity, especially in the B2B space that we find. Basically, what do you know at a trade show? You're there, your prospects are there, the media is there. So why not utilize video in a cost-effective way to actually engage them in conversations with you? We did that recently at the Black Hat conference where the CEO of a company was actually interviewing other thought leaders as part of their campaign, then providing video files to them, so all the people you spoke to are then distributing your content all throughout that ecosystem.
It's much easier to embed across the web, you know? I mean, if you share a video if you've got the video posted to YouTube and it gets shared, the video automatically embeds. If you share, you know, it's very difficult to kind of share like a visual off of Instagram and have it embed. I mean, you can do it, but it's tricky.
And the other thing, too, is that the metrics get pulled along with the YouTube views, too, if it's embedded, so it's built in.
Yeah. And there are lots of also print media now love video because they have to, because of the web being more visual. So, you know, your YouTube videos, storytelling, if you're doing it effectively, can all of a sudden become kind of almost a print story.
So
and so your video moves more.
In this new, and when you're doing alternative storytelling techniques like video, are trolls part of the new world? Should we just get used to that? How do you address trolls when you're doing something like periscoping, for example?
Very simple. Don't feed the trolls. You know, they're going to be there. Ignore them. And if you've built up a significant community, the community will self-monitor and handle the troll for you. Right? Kind of a mob approach. They'll kind of turn on each other and get the infiltrator kicked out.
That's right. Just don't feed them.
Great. We have. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Were you?
No.
I thought you were going to say we have a troll.
We haven't done stuff. Probably.
Well, we may, but they haven't spoken up yet. So.
We actually have a Twitter question. Sierra Middlebrooks wants to know, how do you predict digital and social storytelling will change in the future? What are the emerging trends?
I think the emerging trends are twofold. One is definitely involving the influencers that you engage with in your storytelling as a brand, as an organization. That's going to continue. So in addition to your own efforts to get that content out there, you're relying on the support of others' social ecosystems to get that content shared. I think there's going to be, as Scott was one of the first people at Ford and in the industry to help make this happen, was the authenticity factor is increasing because you can no longer be inauthentic. And I think Richard deserved some of that credit. We've got to be out there because guess what? Everyone will know. Again,
right.
With the politics reference, you can't say one thing in one market anymore and say a different thing in another state because they're all over you for everything.
Right.
So let's talk about that authenticity. Richard, what does that look like?
What does it...
Don't be
in 30 seconds.
I mean, authenticity is exactly that. I mean, it's connecting with people and getting back to them in the same way that we talked about, kind of not wandering into the cocktail, passing out your business cards and walking out again. I mean, it actually involves getting involved. I mean, that's how we started in 2006. That's what Scott did at Ford as well. It was actually engaging with people. And that's still something I think that brands have trouble with. They consider social media a push, a broadcast medium, and in fact, it's not broadcast.
Right.
It's called social for a reason.
Right.
They focus on the media part.
They focus on and it's almost as if it's and the mass media.
Well,
it's almost like that's one of the things I was saying at the beginning is social's different. It's social. So what happens when a customer asks you a question?
Yeah.
Do they get answered? I mean, I had a terrible experience this week where I asked about. I do a little photography on the side, and so I asked a question related to some products and services that I use, and I got a reply, but the reply was call the 1-800 number.
Yeah.
And I was like, really?
Which is always a pain.
Really?
And that's not authentic, right? Being authentic is saying what you mean and meaning what you say. And doing it like a real human being, not like a script. Making someone feel like they matter, like you care about them, and letting them know that there's a real human being on the other end of whether it's the phone, the computer, whatever.
Even if it takes you some time to get back to the answer, get back to them.
Right.
That can be, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I'll get back to you, Bob.
Because people can ferret out a fake type response or a scripted response or a non-response, and they'll hammer you for it. And if it's okay to say you don't know, it's okay to say you don't have the answer, and let them know that you're dealing with it like anybody else would.
So is there a way that you can measure your authenticity, or even in terms of the alternative storytelling techniques in general? Let's talk about measurement. How do you measure success?
I think you're ultimately measured by how receptive the audience is to you. What do they think of you? You can rate it. The greatest customer service survey I've ever gotten was from Delta. I fly Delta a lot. And they say, can you please hold for a one-question survey? And I'm like, well, of course, one question. Who can't do that? And you finish up with the rep, and then they ask you, based on the interchange you just had, if you owned your own business, would you hire this person to work for you?
Right.
Isn't that the most brilliant question
That's a great
ever?
question.
Scale of 1 to 5,
Yeah.
And that's how they determine whether they're successful in their efforts or not. And with Delta, a lot of it does come down to authenticity with the way they handle you in their customer service area.
That's a great one.
And sounds like a good idea to recruit Delta employees.
Not the ones that are quitting.
So we have 3 minutes left. Did you want to say something more?
No.
Okay. We have 3 minutes left.
Taking your lead.
We have 3 minutes left, and I want to get your final thoughts on what are the most important things that PR people and practitioners, but also the industry at large, the media industry, what do we need to take away about storytelling?
I'll start with, I think that it's a great opportunity to connect in a more genuine way with our customers and other stakeholders. Those can be, all kinds of the stakeholders that we have. Secondly, I think that we can say that the storytelling technique is continuing to evolve, and therefore you have to think about visuals in different formats and different types. And thirdly, you have to, to steal a line from Scott, is there's a bunch of humans out there that need to be listened to in order to figure out what your story is, because that brand value that you want to push is not always your story.
Ultimately, I'd say you have to put yourself in the shoes of the audience that you're trying to reach. If it's journalists, if it's the general public, understand the challenges that they're up to. If it's a journalist, they're getting bombarded by hundreds of email pitches a day. How do you fit into that overall story? And Twitter, too, yeah. And it's getting more and more like that. So how do you stand out from that? How do you help them accomplish a goal, right? How do you actually serve your audience rather than making them just sit up and pay attention to you?
Yeah. And I think obviously you have to be telling stories, but you really have to be customizing it for those specific audiences if you're going to get value. And that you brought up the pointer number, the cost of video, perhaps, but the idea if you're creating these opportunities to create multiple stories at one time that are fits for these different audiences, then suddenly the cost factor becomes way less of an issue.
Right. So it's the line between earned and owned and paid, right, is really kind of disappearing. And
it's a virtuous circle.
It's a virtuous circle. I love that.
Yeah. I don't think it's a merger. I think it's a virtuous circle.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, they all kind of feed each other, I think, today.
And then the stakeholder...
it's not that those lines blur.
Right.
I mean, paid is still paid. Owned is still owned. And earned, a good story in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal is still a good story in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. But you can use that earned story to support what you're doing, in your own channel. And paid is still paid. And they all kind of work together in a virtuous way.
We found the best response from digital content is when you're pushing out quote, earned media interviews, hits that have been posted online. Those get a much higher response than any other content.
Interesting. Great. Well, thanks, guys. Really interesting discussion today. And thank you to our audience for watching and participating. Thanks again to our panel. It was an honor. And we're closing up. Thanks.